Welcome to the Next Level Podcast, powered by Manuel, a series connecting you with the best minds in casino, hospitality, tribal government, and beyond. Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone. It's Kenji Hall here. I am very excited today to have my podcast guest, a man who I've known for several years here at San Manuel. He needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyways there. We have Tim Evans, our Deputy General Counsel for the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. I can tell you all, before I let him talk about his origin story, what a superstar he has been for our organization. From just guiding us down the right roads through troubling times and through good times as well. Tim, I appreciate all you continue to do for us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you and get you a little 3-minute origin story as how we started these podcasts. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Thanks so much, Kenji. I appreciate it. And that bar is a little high there. I'm not sure I'm all that. So we'll try to keep this realistic and reasonable. As you mentioned, I'm Tim Evans. I'm Deputy General Counsel here at San Manuel. So essentially, I manage the day-to-day operations of the legal department here. We have a department of about 15 attorneys, and I oversee the daily operations there. I also work on some high-level projects. Before I got to this point in my life, we'll go back to our origin story. I was born, I'm an East Coast guy, so I was born in Maryland. My family comes from a small tribal community in North Carolina called the Hollowassa tribe, which is where both of my parents are from. And so I lived in Maryland until I was about 8 years old, and then my family moved back to North Carolina. There were several moves back and forth over the years between the Washington, D.C., Maryland area and North Carolina. Like many large Southern families, that's my origin. So I'm the youngest of 7 kids, 3 boys and 3 girls, and then I was the tiebreaker. I grew up kind of in a very rural area there in North Carolina. I took an hour-long bus ride to school every morning and evening. Managed to apply to a kind of a selective admission school back in North Carolina called the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics. I was there for the last 2 years of high school, which is a great kind of pre-college experience for me. And then kind of went on and did college and grad school and law school. I've had a great opportunity along the way to attend some amazing places. So for college, I was at Harvard College in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I was a sociology major there. And then I took about 5 years off. I just worked as a paralegal actually in the Bay Area. And was kind of making a decision whether or not to go back to law school. Just kind of enjoyed being a normal person, paying bills and that kind of stuff. I ended up going back to graduate school and law school. I did a joint degree, and I did law school at Cornell Law School in upstate New York. And so I graduated from there in 2003, and I knew I wanted to do tribal law at that time. And so there was a few large law firms throughout the country that had started working with tribal gaming, in particular in the late 1990s, early 2000s. But I was given the opportunity to work with the firm Holland and Knight. So they were based between Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles is where their native law practice group was based. So I chose Los Angeles after 3 years in upstate New York and snow and sleet and rain and everything else. I decided to go to sunny California. I spent time, I did a stint there in Los Angeles for about 2.5 years. Ended up going back to the DC office because all my family was still on the East Coast. I stayed there for about 6 or 7 years. Same firm, still doing tribal law, representing tribal clients in some slightly different capacities. I was a federally registered lobbyist in addition to a lawyer. So I guess I'm just the scum of the earth when it comes to some people's views. But I did great work in representing tribal clients there in that capacity. But I kept doing tribal work out here in California and just couldn't get away from it. So I ended up moving back to LA with Holland and Knight in 2013. And I've been in LA or the LA area ever since. I worked for H&K for a total of about 15 years. I left as a partner. And then I joined San Manuel's in-house legal department. San Manuel had been a tribal client for Holland and Knight for a long time. We still use H&K for some matters. But I joined San Manuel in September of 2019, right before the pandemic and all the fun started about 6 months later. So yeah, that's how I got it.
That was an exciting time dealing with the pandemic and having a legal opinion when we're in these meetings as we were during that was always nice to have. And I used to always give you the I think that you're running for office when I'm looking for an answer. But I think there is something to be said about politics and legal and understanding both sides of any equation and why it's important to do that. Can you talk about just a little bit of that, just making sure that you're open to both sides of an argument so you can understand what the right decision is?
Sure. I think especially in doing advocacy work for tribes, you have to understand that the law is not kind of practiced in isolation. This is not kind of cut and dry corporate law. What is the business structure that you need to carry out a transaction? When it comes to tribal advocacy, there's a lot of history and policy behind it, and the law would eventually reflect what the government wanted to do in its relationship with tribes. So over the years, the federal government has had various policies or overarching policies when it comes to interacting with tribes, whether that's, the original establishment of reservations, or whether it turns into kind of an attempt to acclimate them into American society, to giving them the right to recognizing their right to self-determination. So you have to understand kind of the policy and the politics behind that. And so the law is not committed in this vacuum. It's not practiced in this vacuum when it comes, I think, in particular, tribal advocacy. And, I'm not a huge politician. I thought at some point I might want to get into politics. After my time in Washington, D.C., I was like, nah, I'm okay with that. I'd rather just be a lawyer. But I definitely understand the importance of it. And I think that's one thing for younger attorneys who are just getting out, and you come out of law school and you think that the world is established by whatever the U.S. Supreme Court says or what some federal court of appeals says. And what they don't really teach you is the fact that regardless of what that court says, the legislature can go back and change that law that court ruled upon. And that's a tool for tribal advocacy and client advocacy generally as well. So.
I think that just not even in legal, but even from an operations perspective, from what I see on my end, is understanding the why we do some of that, and how do we figure out the origin of some of these decisions so we know how to attack it or how to do something better or different. I think that understanding the why behind whether it's an operational procedure or a person is very important for our success. And so I'm going to ask you my why for you is that why did you decide to go into the legal field? What is it about the legal field that enamored you to do what you're doing now?
I think the big thing is just kind of where I come from. I come from a small rural tribal community, and I saw a need for it. There's people just simply don't have access to legal assistance, to legal support. They don't have the right to advocate or the ability to advocate for their rights. And what I've come to discover over the years is that it's not a function really of whether or not it's rural or urban or poor or more resources. It's kind of access to information and access to an understanding of the world that's going around you. And if people are given that access, they tend to make very good decisions. If they're informed, generally speaking, it's not about intelligence level. It's not about rich or poor. It's about having the ability to be given an understanding of your rights in the legal field or otherwise. And people who come from, lesser resources like the place that I come from have just as much of ability to make a great decision if they're given the access to legal support and information they need to make good decisions. And so I saw that lacking even when I was at a younger age. And so I wanted to give back to that. And also, to be honest, by the time I got into college, everybody in college, when you go to places like I went to, there's no one says this, but there's an implication that there's like 3 routes you go. You're either a doctor, a lawyer, or you go work on Wall Street. And I sucked at biology and at math, so Wall Street and the doctor were out of the running for me. So here I am.
So the science and math high school did not help you out with your math skills there. No.
I enjoyed it while I was there, but then they got onto some level that was well beyond like my comprehension. So I'm just the lawyer in the back of the room now. So
I think that it's interesting when you talk about just tribal law as well and your interest in that side of it. I think that what probably makes it more difficult is because there is such specialization within tribal law, and with the rights and the sovereignty of tribes in where they live in their lands. Can you talk a little about the importance of sovereignty and how to protect that with with what you're doing from a legal opinion there?
sure. I think kind of the most important thing for people to take away when it comes to use of the word sovereignty and as it is applied to tribes is a recognition that that term applies to governments, not individuals, but to governments. And so, Native tribes are the only quote unquote ethnic group or racial group that are recognized in the US Constitution because they're not recognized as an ethnic or racial group, but as governments with whom the federal government can interact the same way it does with the states or foreign governments. And so I think the important thing for people to remember is, yes, Kenji and his team run an incredible operation at Yamava, and there's no doubt it's a world-class facility, and it's on par with the greatest experience you can have in Las Vegas or anywhere else in the world, quite frankly. But at the end of the day, that is an economic development project for a tribe. And that tribe, and the reason it is kind of what it is because that tribe has in the past had limited opportunities for economic development. That in most other tribes, gaming was one of the few avenues that has worked out on a somewhat larger scale basis. Certainly not for every tribe. But for some tribes, it's been a meaningful way to actually provide the equivalent of what would be a tax base or tax revenues to support communities. And that's the way you have to view what we do here ultimately. Again, there's an operational side, but that operation is for the benefit of a community and at the behest of a tribal government. And so that to me is what you got to keep in mind is regardless of the amenities, how great the experience may be, at the end of the day, this is for the support of a tribal government. And I think if you keep that in mind, it helps kind of advance the notion that this is not for profit. Ultimately, this is for the advancement of communities that have not had the opportunity to do so before. And in that regard, it's something well worth fighting for, however that fight may be and whoever the threat may be.
I feel like that's something that I always think about when I'm not working for shareholders, I'm working for a people. And what we do is to hopefully, allow the tribe to exist in perpetuity. If I do my job right, that we've allowed this tribe to exist in perpetuity and protect their sovereignty under that umbrella. So I think that's the passion of which how I go about my day every day is that I'm not working for a shareholder. I'm working for something so much greater than that. And then with all of the things that our tribe does philanthropically, it fills my cup as well to know that I'm doing it for the right people and the right causes. I think passion, I know if you've heard any of my podcasts, I talk about passion probably in every one, because I think that in every situation, having passionate about what you do is how you continue to grow and get better. It certainly makes for a better work environment. So I want to ask you about that, for your passion, what keeps you passionate about what you're doing every day?
A couple of things. One, what we just talked about, this kind of fight for tribal sovereignty, the protecting of tribal rights, has been an ongoing fight for centuries, and I'm not trying to be melodramatic about that, but the fact that tribes even exist is pretty amazing, given the history and the subjugation they've been through hundreds of years. So I think there's that kind of being part of something much, much bigger, that I try to remind myself that, yes, this may be a single piece of advice about a single legal issue, but at the end of the day, you're helping tribes to advance, and this tribe in particular to advance in ways that just weren't imaginable 50, 60 years ago even. So you try to keep that momentum going. I think the other thing is this is not easy. And I think throughout my kind of educational career, my professional career, I like challenges. And this has definitely been a challenge. I think when you're representing any tribe, in particular one like San Manuel, that has such a vast portfolio, not only of economic development projects, but of social services they're providing to their citizens, philanthropic initiatives, and so much going on around here. There's something new every day. Right? There's something, no 2 days are alike. And I've been very fortunate to represent San Manuel here for the past 5+ years. And before that, a bunch of tribes across the country as well. And no 2 days are alike. And that's always interesting. I never had to choose, like so many of, say, my law school classmates had to choose between being a litigator or being a transactional attorney. You did one or the other, and that was kind of what you're expected to do for the next 20, 30 years of your career. I've never had to choose that, and I've done that and so much more. I've worked on huge financings. I've been part of some federal court litigation. It was relatively important. But I've also, written ordinances for kind of community-based events and everything else under the sun. So it's the variety that keeps it kind of passionate for me. And I think finally, I've been doing this now for 20 years. I enjoy what I'm doing, but I also realize that in addition to some of the bigger projects that I want to be involved with, that I want to keep fighting for, it's also time for me to bring up some of our younger attorneys, some of our less experienced attorneys who need to kind of get thrown into the variety of things that I've been put into. And so that seeing some of our younger attorneys come in and take over and take command of some of the projects we have and doing just an outstanding job, that's really exciting. That's really, really exciting. I know that San Manuel and many other tribes who are looking for legal advocates are in really good hands. I'm not so sure I'd have a job if I had to compete with some of these folks, put it to you that way. So.
Well, I think you hit that right on the head too, as well. Just thinking about, for me, what the tribe represents and who they are, I feel like there is a challenge, but also a little bit of pressure too, as well, of making sure that I perform at my best, because I don't want to let them down. It's almost personal for me. It's like working, for your own family. The last thing you want to do is let one of them down. So for me, I'm always pressed. I'm always challenged to go forward, and I think that you should be very proud of the legacy that you've built too, as well. I think when I talk about being a better human in different scenarios and leaving the planet in a better place than you found it, when you get to put in through some of these ordinances and some of these really big legal opinions that change the way we do business or that change the way we live our lives, you have to be proud of that. So I want to commend you for those things and advancing how tribal legal services have continued to grow and continue to educate the youth and making them stronger too. Kind of brings me to this next question a little bit too. There's probably a million lawyer jokes and none of them are very flattering. I'm not going to tell any of them because that would be probably inappropriate on a podcast. But what would make someone consider legal? What advice would you give to someone who is considering going the legal field?
Okay, well, first of all, I've heard all the jokes too. I've heard all the sharks and as I mentioned, I was, in addition to being a lawyer, I was a federally registered lobbyist as well. So I'm pretty
double down. Yeah, you've doubled down.
Pretty low on the total poll for a lot of folks. But I think the one thing that I would tell people with considering the legal field, one, it's still an honorable profession. Don't let all the jokes and the kind of put downs and the kind of underhanded comments that people make about lawyers get to you in that regard. The fact is, if you're an attorney, you have passed a bar exam, which puts you in an elite class by yourselves, just to start with. And then once you actually practice, everybody loves those jokes until they need a lawyer. And everybody at some point needs a lawyer. And that's just the reality of it. And it is still an honorable profession. Yes, there are some folks who practice this in a way that we prefer they not. But that can be said about just about every profession. I think there's still something upstanding about being an attorney. There's something that kind of society needs attorneys. Because at the end of the day, what we essentially do is say, here's the rule, and either you're on one side of it or you're not. And we help the world make those decisions about what side of the line they're on. And those rules, those laws help define what kind of society we have. So, I don't think it's a coincidence that so many historically important people have had at least a legal background, if not were actually practicing lawyers. I think they're still just as crucial as ever, if not more important. I think with that in mind, and that, this is still something honorable to do. And if you don't believe that, go back and watch To Kill a Mockingbird. It's still just as great as ever. And it's probably convinced more people to go to law school than any other single factor in history. But I think it shows a point. I would say that for those who are considering going to law school, I would just encourage you to really think about whether or not you actually want to practice. And I know there are plenty of people who have gone to law school and either didn't sit for the bar, sat for the bar, and decided not to practice, and that's perfectly fine. And I think that was kind of a reasonable decision back when I started practicing. But I think now there's a couple of things that I would encourage people, or reasons why I would encourage people to actually practice if you go. One is there's just a greater need. Even if the number of jokes and underhand comments have increased, so has the need for lawyers. The way our society moves now, the advents in technology, kind of the different ways we communicate, they require different rules. They require different laws and kind of setting of boundaries. And it's going to take more and more great people to have an understanding of that and help people to set those boundaries, set those rules, set those lines. Everything from privacy to virtual reality to our life online. None of that existed 30, 40 years ago, and now they do. And so they're entirely new fields for lawyers to stand up to and help define what society is going to look like. So, I think it's that, and also just quite frankly, the expense of law school. If you're going to go through that, quite frankly, the law schools are somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 a year. And you're doing 3 years of that. If you're going to go through that expense, if you're going to kind of put delays possibly of some of your family decisions, your buying of a house, et cetera, starting a career, et cetera, because of the expense, then I think you should at least practice for a few years. And I think it gives you a different perspective than just the law school perspective of reading cases, understanding what a court said. The actual practice makes you understand that, one, you're not just seen as a lawyer, but you're seen as a problem solver. That's the way many people view lawyers. They think that you are capable of doing some intellectually tough analyses, and therefore, even if it's not a purely legal problem, that you can help them with. And I think that's a great feeling. And whether that's getting a huge transaction done or doing some pro bono work on a tenant lease to help someone stay in their home, I think it's just as important. And I think everybody should have that experience, at least for a few years.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for when you talk about practicing, and it's what I've called like book smart versus street smart. You can be book smart, but then not understand the realities of how the situation's different from a classroom than it is in real life. And having that understanding of both sides, I think, really makes you stronger as a whole.
Yeah.
Now, I know that probably when I think about when you were going to law school, I know it's been a little while there, but there's been a lot of things that have changed. You probably had your bar tutorials on cassette tapes or something like that. For those of you who don't know, cassette tapes, I'm just kidding. You can look it up. It's on Wikipedia. They're really fun to look at. But there's been a lot of technological advances, not just from how the bar is processed and studying, but just the legal side in general. You talked a little bit about it with AI and some other pieces. Can you talk about some of those bigger changes, the key changes that have happened in the industry since you've been involved?
Sure. One thing that I've noticed in examining kind of the professional path that some of the more recent law school grads follow, when I started back in the Stone Ages, you kind of had a set practice and path of how your profession was going to go. If you started in a law firm, you started as an associate, you stayed as an associate and worked on progressively more important projects for 7 or 8 years. Then you went up to make partner. If you made partner and you became an owner of the firm, or at least, first non-equity partner, perhaps for a few years. Then after a few more years, you'd be an equity partner and you become an actual owner in the firm. And in those regards, if you went to college, say when you're 22, you graduate when you're 22, you start law school at that age, you finish by the time you're 25. A lot of people, from my cohort would do that. But by the time they're 40 or 45, they've kind of done what they can do in terms of climbing the ladder. And I think a lot of people either got burned out on that or they ended up doing second careers soon after that point. Now, though, what I've seen is that a lot of people change not only law firms, but even like tracks. So they may go into in-house position at an Amazon or a Google or something like that, not long after being out of law school. They may go work for a government agency for a bit of time. They may get into lobbying, which is I kind of dabbled in, but I was not in that world for very long. But there's all sorts of other kind of doors that having a law degree opens for you, whether it's in media, being a consultant, kind of being a media figure yourself. And now there's all kind of the world of podcasting and things of this nature that so many lawyers want to step up and give their 2 cents worth on things. So there's a lot less kind of ingrained paths forward, which I've noticed. In my career, I've been in 2 places for 20 years. And yet some other, more recent graduates from law school have probably been in 4 or 5 different places within the span of 6 or 7 years. And you just have to understand that that's kind of what the path is for people who are trying to be a part of this profession now. They want to get different experiences, learn as much as they can from a wide variety of areas, and do that in several different settings. So I think there's that kind of the path that lawyers follow. I think the other thing, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, is the areas that have come onto the scene since I've started practicing. It's kind of amazing how far technology has advanced over the past, say, 20 years since I've been practicing. And so now we have issues with like data privacy that were completely non-existent. I don't think that the field even existed or hardly existed when I first started, which is a major area. Intellectual property rights have become so important. The need for IP is just overwhelming. And those are the types of lawyers who can command their work environment, their salary, et cetera. When they're working for like major tech companies, they are seriously in demand. But even kind of the areas that are starting to unfold and will be unfolding for the next decade or so, and then thereafter, we don't know what AI is going to do in the legal field. We've seen some instances where people attempted to do things like write briefs that get submitted to courts by using AI chat feature. It didn't work out so well for a few people. We are kind of a historical profession, and there's still kind of responsibilities and obligations on you to review everything you submit to a court or that you submit for a client to review. And if you don't do that, you can't depend upon kind of an AI bot to do that for you. So it'll be interesting to see where this kind of interaction between the legal field and AI works, because we have kind of this historical way of doing things that's been in place for, quite frankly, for a couple centuries at least, going back to English common law. And yet we have kind of demands and expectations of the society around you that, no, you're going to get your AI bot to write your brief, to do all the checking of the cases cited within it. And I expect that to be done within a couple hours, not a couple weeks. So it'll be interesting to see how this moves forward.
I think there's a lot of excitement of how, I hate to even say there's excitement within the legal industry because it just feels like there wouldn't be, because it is such, like you said, it's based off of such historical professional decisions and everything that's been backwards so far. But there are laws that are going to be on the books in the next several years that haven't even been considered. Like the future is completely different from where we are. And you're right, like with AI and what they can do and citing briefs and being able to do research, it makes it it's way more efficient I would assume that way, but it's also one of those where who knows what's next. That's the part that I think is somewhat scary, but it's in every field, really. We're running into a lot of the unknown. And I think that requires a lot of flexibility in how you think, some originality on that side. I guess my next question that I want to lead this into is what other skills are going to be essential to continue longevity in your field?
I think having the ability to possibly have like I don't know if you want to call it a second career, but other interests which you have honed your skill set to a degree where if you had to put down law, you could possibly go take up something else. And I say that because, understanding what AI is going to do or understanding what virtual reality may be like for a lawyer will require an understanding of what a virtual reality world looks like. And I think on some level, you can't do that writing legal memos and sitting on Zoom calls with clients necessarily. You have to be kind of down in the weeds of that to have an understanding of it. Just like right now, there's so many lawyers who are doing like data privacy and data security. They have to understand kind of what's at stake in order for them to be good lawyers and to understand how to protect what's at stake. And you can really only do that by getting kind of down in the weeds with the operational people. And I think that's kind of what is becoming more and more asked of an attorney, is for them to understand the operational side, the kind of experiential side of their clients' operations or business. And, I early on in my career, I could sit in a law firm in downtown LA and be hours away from my tribal clients, and I could review their contracts. It was kind of basically done, and kind of do other basic work, get on the phone call, a conference call, and that was perfectly fine. I think now there's so much demand that an attorney actually be, whether it's on the floor of the casino, in the back of the house, understanding exactly what data is stored where, or what have you. They have to be intertwined within the operations itself. I think that is what's going to be demanded of lawyers more and more. And, kind of the old large firm structure, I think, is going to be impacted by that, because that older structure could have an attorney in New York doing basic work for somebody in California or in London, et cetera. And I'm not sure that's going to be possible or as possible, because the experience on the ground with your client, I think, has become more and more and more important. In order to protect those interests, you have to understand them. And I think with things like, whether it's privacy, data security, virtual reality, AI, those things will only be understood kind of as you're interacting with them, because they are so different from kind of the way we practice, from the way we communicate, the way we acted as a society up until now.
Yeah, I think that having that operational backing certainly makes me, as a quote, I'm going to call the client in this case of our relationship, it certainly helps with understanding, because similar to what you mentioned at the very beginning, understanding the why of what we're doing and how we're doing it, to be down and dirty with us and understand why we're thinking what we're thinking and understanding what we're looking to do and making sure that there's a way to do it legally, I think is very important for us, as opposed to, hey, here's the law, this is it, we're done. And understanding both sides of it. Again, why I joke that I call you the governor or a politician here is because you're kind enough to listen through the whole argument and understanding what both sides are. So I do thank you for that. That's my last compliment for you for the day. So next question I want to ask you about, there's a lot of TV shows and things that are out there that talk about legal and the law profession there. You have like LA Law from back in the day, but like Suits has been the new real popular one. And while it really glamorizes what the law profession is, we know it isn't that. It's a lot of hard work that doesn't necessarily get shown in those spaces there. How, from your perspective, and how do you manage work-life balance, and how have you been able to do it over the course of years? I know that, again, there's so many hours that had to be put in that are just it's a thankless profession sometimes there. Can you talk about how you've been able to balance that in your life?
Yeah, I have to admit, I'm probably not the best person to ask this question. But But I also think that was part of the view of the profession when I started. And that was you did whatever it took to get your case done, to get your client their advice when they needed it, and in order to help your career advance. And so there was not, at least when I started, there was not a lot of talk about work-life balance. It was work, and then whatever was left was life. I think over the years, I've had to understand and had to appreciate and had to make time and set boundaries in order to do that. Other people in my life, they've had to actually, encourage me to do that, because I think also, to your point, this is a profession that will take as much as you give it. It will take as little or as much as you give it. And there's always something else to do. There's always some further research to be done. There's always some other law to investigate to see if you can make your case better. But at certain points, you have to gain confidence to do that. And I think for me, just with experience, that's helped. It's kind of like being in college. When you're a freshman, you try to be studious and read everything. By the time you're a senior, you know what you have to do to get by and be okay with it. And I just think with experience, you understand what's important, what's not. And so when it comes to the actual practice, and so as part of your work-life balance, you understand that, okay, I can do this and I can be confident that I've done my job, I've done my professional responsibilities here with respect to my client's interests. And now it's 5:30, 6 o'clock. I'm going to go home and I'm going to go have dinner with my family. And I'm going to be kind of a normal person for a few hours at least. I think for me, it was just kind of gaining experience and also learning to say no, and also learning, particularly in this job, and I'm still learning this, and that's how to delegate more. You have to understand that it's not all on your back. And I think, and it has nothing to do with the qualifications of my team. Like I said earlier, we have some of our younger attorneys who are just knocking it out the park, but I also have extremely well-experienced, intelligent, kind of bet the house on kind of attorneys and my vice presidents, as well as in our CLCO and Aaron Copeland. And so the idea that I have to do it all, which is one of those things that you kind of get instilled in you early in your legal career, at least when I started, that's not true, because you have a great team around you, and they're just as capable of doing great work as you are. I'm so happy to have such good people, and it's up to me now to make better use of those around me, quite frankly. I'm getting there, but there's still a lot of work to do, because you kind of start out with, this is your client and it's your responsibility to take care of them. But you got to understand you're part of a team to take care of them also.
And you said you weren't the right person to ask that question, but you are, because if I'm not mistaken, you at some point in time in your career managed an East Coast, West Coast relationship with your wife there, and completely on different coasts for a long segment of time. And you were able to figure out how to manage your personal and your work to be able to do those things. I think there is a lot to be said for being able to pay attention to those moments that you need to pay attention to, and finding a spouse who understands what your desires are too. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's my wife and I have been married for just over 20 years. So I started practicing law right around the same time we got married. And we managed to do long distance relationships, commuter marriage, whatever you want to call it, for all those years, actually, until the pandemic happened. We would have, she's an academic, and so she would be able to front load in one semester some of her classes, so she could take off one semester plus the summer or something like that. But we would work around that. But I guess in that regard, her profession was a lot more flexible than mine, and so that definitely helped. So when the pandemic came around and we were under the same roof, I think we were both a little concerned about, well, how's this going to go living together on a full-time basis? But we actually did great, I'm proud to say. And, you have to understand, especially I think as you get older, that the work is going to be there. The work is going to be there. The fight on behalf of your tribal clients is always going to be there. It's been there for hundreds of years. The world is not waiting on you. So there will always be plenty to do. but there will not be plenty of time to enjoy that time with your spouse, your family. Um, you got to make time to make memories. And I think as you get older, you start learning that and appreciating that more. And I think for me, over the past, say, 5, 6, 7 years, that in particular has been extremely important. And it's just kind of become front and center for me. So, yes, I still work hard. I'm still juggling a commuter marriage to a certain extent. But at the same time, you figure out that, okay, you got to sit down with a calendar, and just as important as my meetings with Kenji or with Casino on some new potential build out or whatever it may be, is the fact that I need to go see my wife and my dogs and everything else. And that needs to be on the calendar as well and be just as important. So.
She for sure is a saint. I'm going to give her the compliment this time there. You did talk a little about delegation as well, and I wanted to dive into this a little bit because for young leaders, you don't get to be the person who gets to delegate down. You're the one who gets the delegations to you. Part of it is paying dues to where you're getting to, but it's also important for those young leaders to understand that they still need to have part of their life, but it doesn't come without probably even harder work. It's that freshman year that you're talking about where you're studying, you're doing everything, you're trying to get involved on the campus, you know, all that stuff. What is your thought process on that? How do you teach your newest members of the team that, hey, sometimes you do have to suck it up and deal with this because it's just not going to be as easy as you think it will be?
Well, I think the first thing is to let them understand they're not the first person to go through it. That you know, I did it. My colleagues, my VPs that I worked with did it. We all went through it, and it's you know, and there are going to be some projects that kind of take over your life for a few days or even possibly for a few months. And you have to sit down and explain to your family and explain to your friends that, hey, I'm in the middle of this. You might not see much of me here for a few weeks or even a few months. But the other thing to understand is, in my experience, there is no wasted effort if it's hard effort, because people will always notice. Hard work always pays off. I just have no way of getting around that. And I understand there are people who are naturally inclined and who are gifted. I get all that. But in my experience, there is no substitute for hard work. And there's no substitute for showing up when you're supposed to. I've been in the room with some absolutely brilliant people who can run circles around me. I've been in the room with some absolutely spectacular attorneys, but they also didn't show up when they needed to. There's no saying that showing up is half the battle, but the fact is, if you show up and someone else doesn't, then it's not half the battle, it's all the battle, because you just won by merely showing up. And so sitting down and doing the work will always pay off, I think, and letting kind of the younger attorneys know that, like, that's where this comes from. This is a profession. It's about the practice of it. And you don't get that practice just by reading cases and outlining what the rules and the analysis were. You get it by sitting down, doing the work that the client's asking you to do, helping the client understand what the risks are of taking one step versus taking another step. How can they minimize the risk in either direction they may go? Putting in the effort to help your client understand those things, there will always be a reward for that. It may not be immediate. It may not be kind of instantaneous, but it gets noticed. Those who go beyond what they're asked to do will always be noticed. That there's no getting around that. And so I think helping them understand that there's a reward at the end of this. It may not come up immediately, but it will come up. It will be noticed. And I think that's one reason why I'm just so kind of proud and amazed and just thrilled to see what some of our younger attorneys are doing in our department, because someone, not necessarily me, but someone obviously taught them this lesson, and they know it, and it's just been fabulous to see. It's really fabulous to see. And so you're right, they don't get to delegate. I may have to delegate to them, but it's never like, oh God, I got to do this. It's it's more like I'm glad I'm getting the opportunity to work on something different. I'm glad I'm getting the opportunity to interact with tribal citizens or with tribal leadership or casino leadership. And, they've risen to the occasion. Every time I've seen them, they've risen to the occasion. So I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud to be a part of that.
Yeah, I think that when you talk about that hard work, and it's not that we delegate because we want to, it's because we delegate because we have a different priority in many cases there. But I think it's important for all leaders to remember that things that we're delegating isn't just because we want to delegate them. You should be willing to do it, but if you have a bigger priority, you definitely need to be working on your bigger priorities. And what the team gets out of it that you delegate to is the learning and the experience that you just can't gain any other way by getting your hands dirty. And that hard work and that dedication, I think, is something that I look forward to when I'm trying to partner with others, is to find those team members or those future leaders that are willing to put in and go the extra because they want to learn more. And that learning and that constant need for more information, I think, makes them stronger and makes us stronger as a whole organization. So I appreciate your younger attorneys for doing those things too as well, because I see the work that they put in. I see the quality that they're putting out. I see that they're helping us progress and move forward. So kudos to that team there. When you're looking, though, for partnering, I look at that hard work and that tenacity and that, that ability to learn. What do you look for when you're trying to partner with others?
Well, I think in addition to that, if I'm willing to put in the work, then I expect those that I work with to be willing to put in the work too. I wouldn't ask anything of anyone that I would ask myself, and I expect them to have the same perspective. And that's been one great thing about my colleagues at the vice president level in the legal department is I know that they have kind of been through the training and experience for a couple of decades of what this profession is like, what it can be like, how tough it can be at times. So it's, that's the first thing. And I'm definitely been very blessed with some great VPs in the legal department who do that. I think the other thing is, and this may sound too simplistic, but it's like, okay, would you want to go out and have a beer with this person? And I think that's kind of one of the litmus tests, because this practice can be grinding at times. It is not what we were talking about earlier, LA law or suits or what have you. It's not that. I can assure you that. It's a lot of monotonous, almost at times, review of pages and pages and pages of writing. And when you're doing that at 2 a.m., what you got to ask yourself is this the kind of person I want to be doing that grind at 2 a.m. when there's still a couple more hours worth of work to do? We don't do that a lot in-house. That's not what we're going for. But at times there will be projects where that can happen. And that can be whether you're in a law firm, in an in-house department like us, even governmental agency, et cetera. There's litigation or big transactions that come up that just have to be done within a kind of a compressed time frame. And so the question you really want to ask yourself is, who do I want to be on the other side of that table in the early hours of the morning, working with me, making it through this? And I think a key to that is the ability to keep it light. We deal with some pretty serious stuff, some extremely serious stuff. I mean, protecting tribal sovereignty, helping a tribe advance in ways they have not done for decades when they didn't have the opportunity to do so. That's really important stuff to me and to a lot of people. But at the end of the day, I think you kind of go back to the point made earlier. It's going to be there no matter what, And so while you're in the midst of it, try to keep it light. I think, you and I, Kenji, have had this ongoing governor, politician line for years now. And for those who don't know, Kenji says, I talk like a politician sometimes because I tell him on the one hand this, but on the other hand that. And he says it sounds like I'm running for office. But I think kind of, this work can be so intense at times, whether that's on the operational side here at Yamava or in our legal department or elsewhere, that you got to have to be able to kind of laugh and keep it light because there are going to be some long hours and some long days and some really tough stuff you got to go through. And you just got to make sure that in between that really tough stuff that you're around people with an attitude that can kind of keep you going, because it can get overwhelming, but you want to be able to keep it light a little bit, keep a smile, keep a good laugh, and keep things going.
That's right, Governor. That's right. But I do appreciate that. Like, again, for those of you, we joke about this, and the reason I do this is because I expect that kind of answer from Tim, is because I want to know both sides of it, because inevitably the decision in many of these cases will land on me or our team or a group of leaders. And if I don't know what both sides and the risks are on both sides, if I say yes or if I say no, not knowing that risk makes it a blind decision. And I shouldn't be counting on Tim or any legal opinion to make sure that they're there to make the decision. They're there to provide the guidance to make the decision. Hopefully in my role, I'm smart enough to understand which decision is the right one. And if I'm going to make the wrong decision, they're going to tell me, hey, if you do this way, this is what the consequence could be. And I appreciate that. It certainly just helps me enlighten the fact is I need someone to check me and to tell me no. And anytime you're in a position, like when you talk about a skill that I think other people I like to partner is, I want to partner with people who are willing to challenge me and tell me no as well. Because there is something important to be told that if I just say, yeah, we should do this, and Tim doesn't go and tell me both sides of the equation or what the risk is by me doing that, we could be in a much worse position because I wasn't thinking about those things. So relying on that expertise is huge. The other thing that you talked about was I think it's more about a cultural fit and how important that is. And so my advice to future leaders is you need to find a place that fits who you are too as well. I've talked about this a few times in different podcasts and different conversations, is that there are people who preceded me in this job that are smarter than I am. I guarantee it. But I believe that I have a better cultural fit to what we're trying to do, to what we're looking to do as an entire enterprise and with the tribe. And those things are slightly different. And people who work well with me understand that cultural fit is more important in many cases than the job knowledge that you may have. Job knowledge, while very important, doesn't outdo cultural fit and the want and the passion, the desire to do something. Because when it comes down to it, when the chips are on the table, if you have someone who is on your side and is rooting for you as a leader, they're going to be there to back you up when things are crazy. If you don't, what happens is that they're going to leave you on the island. They're going to go home and they're going to leave you there, and you're going to have to deal with it all by yourself. And nobody wants that, I don't think, from any perspective.
Right. Yeah. The chemistry among your team is absolutely critical. And people understanding what that chemistry is, and they understanding that the leaders have their back, so that the leaders can know that the people with whom they work have their back as well. It has to be this kind of two-way street. And, and understanding who's good at what, whose strong points lie where, and gearing their work towards their strong points, giving them opportunities to bring up on areas that may not be as strong, but they're interested in doing. That all those are critical in building a team, and we're trying to do it. It can be difficult in a place like San Manuel where there's so much going on that the immediacy of the work at times can get in front of that, but you got to stop and make time to do that. So I personally am wanting to do that more, trying to do it more with my team, and making sure that people are aligned where they're going to get the most, not just out for the organization, but for themselves.
Yeah, I always talk about COVID as just a situation where it was a really difficult time for many of us there, and understanding what was happening. There was so much uncertainty in the air, but to have the group that we had come together and understand all of the aspects that could be happening in an ever-changing environment just proved how well we fit together, and the ability to make really tough decisions in some cases there to go forward. Without that fit, without people all trying to figure out and get to the same cause, man, it would have been a nightmare. We came through that so smoothly in many cases there, and have the tribe to care more about the people over the profits was tremendous. And understanding that's who our culture is, that's what we want to be. It's made me so proud to be part of this.
It was amazing team effort. It really was.
So I could talk for easily a lot longer and ask you a ton of questions and pepper you with stuff, but I do know I'm trying to wrap this up inside of an hour. So I am going to ask you my final question of the day. For all of the people who are out there listening, we always ask for 3 tips that you would provide anyone who wants to take their career to the next level. What would those 3 tips be, Tim?
Okay, so one, I think I mentioned earlier, there's no substitute for hard work in whatever you do. There will be people who are naturally gifted, who may be naturally inclined, but those folks, they can get to a certain level. Hard work is what will take you to the next level, I think. And that sounds kind of cliche-ish, but I've always found it to be true. No matter how good you may be at something, if you work just a little bit harder, try to learn a little bit more, you can go to the next step that you may not even thought possible. I think that's kind of critical. The other thing that I had mentioned earlier too is doing that hard work means you'll show up. And it sounds very simplistic, but again, being there when you're asked, I think sometimes we get involved in teams that are so kind of, they are so overproductive that we forget that some of the simple stuff matters a lot. And for people who are trying to get to the next level, showing up when you're needed, when you're asked, can make a huge difference in your career. I can't tell you how many times I've had an opportunity to do something that was advantageous for the advancement of my career, and I ended up being the only person there to do it. Going above and beyond what you're asked to do and showing up on what you're asked to do can be an incredibly important means of getting to the next step, I think. And I think maybe just third is, take it light. Take it light. This is all incredible stuff. This is all serious stuff. And we all want to be important. But one, I guess a part of that is set your ego aside. When we're talking about people that we would like to partner with, how we want to build teams, I think one of those things, in addition to, or part of keeping it light, is not taking yourself too seriously. And I think that means putting your ego aside. As I've always told people, I'd rather that they know the work I do than the fact that I did it. From my perspective, if I'm trying to do this fight for tribal sovereignty and being an advocate for tribal rights, I don't really care whether I get credit for it or not. What matters to me is that the work gets done and that the result gets there for tribes. And we'll worry about the credit later, and whether or not it comes or not. You can always know that you had success and fought a good fight. So I think there's kind of those few things. It's set your ego aside and show up and work hard. And with those 3 things, I think it can go a long way.
Those are great tips. Tim, thank you very much for joining us today. I really enjoyed our time on this podcast. I enjoy our time outside the podcast too. But for those of you who don't know, I'm going to be his campaign manager for 2028. Tim Evans, he's your man. Thanks again for being here. And hopefully you guys all gain some really good wisdom out of this.
Thanks so much, Kenji. I really appreciate it.
Check out more episodes at thenextlevelcareers.com.